Hey friends, you're watching BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry.
And I'm Irene.
We're out here in the greenhouse. We're out here in the greenhouse for a very special reason.
Right, well, we've been talking, we mentioned to you guys earlier that the problems we had in the yard with deer made us rethink our fall garden. And we've been talking privately for several months about redesigning the interior of the greenhouse anyway, even if things hadn't gone wrong out in the garden. So that's what we're here for today, is to talk about what happens next.
Yeah, we spent time this morning actually out here measuring and going over what we're going to do and why we're going to do it.
Right. First, I would like to say it hasn't been a complete fail.
No, it hasn't been a complete fail at all.
No, we have been up to our armpits, and I still have way too many that I like to think about right now in cucumbers. These cucumbers over here have produced and produced and produced all summer. In fact, we've already decided that next summer we will only plant half as many cucumbers in here, because with only one cucumber eater and a limited number of pickles that need to be made, how many can you eat? But beyond that, we, as an experiment, threw a couple of plants in here at the end of the summer, really because things were, I didn't have room for them in the garden. It was just so hot, and we figured they had a better chance in here. We threw a watermelon plant in here, actually 2 watermelon plants in here, and we threw a pumpkin plant in here and several peppers. The peppers, gangbusters. I've got a whole drawer right now that needs to be frozen of both regular old California Wonder bell peppers and also the Antohi pepper, which is also a sweet pepper, but it's a yellow instead. In here, we also have, believe it or not 1, but 2 watermelons. Now, they're not huge. There's one back over here that's about this big, and there's one over here that's about this big, but honestly, that's more than I ever expected. We don't have any pumpkins so far, but it ain't over yet, so we'll see what happens there. I've got a ton of pak choi sitting over in the corner, and we laughed because underneath the peppers, I reused an old wicking tote like this to put peppers into, and you know, I'm watering the peppers, and I've got choy sum that's come up underneath them. So I have 2 or 3 choy sum plants in there that I'm actually going to add to the stir fry for dinner tonight.
So let's talk briefly about the things that haven't worked.
Right.
One thing that hasn't worked is the deep water culture that we're doing over here.
Yeah, we don't even know where to start on it. Henry's done tons and tons of research. We're keeping the numbers right. We chose plants that were supposed to be able to do well. The temperature of the water has not been outrageous at all, and it's just not working.
Now, what we've had to do is we've had to put some shade over the top of these plants because they just get the living daylight beat out of them when the sun is really overhead.
And it doesn't make sense because I have pak choi over in that corner there. Now, they do get shade part of the day there, but those pak choi plants are this big.
They're huge.
They're huge. I mean, the 2 of us could not eat one for dinner. You know, if I used an entire one of the thing of soup, it would be several days worth of soup. So, I don't know. This is a fail, and we're going to write it off for now, but maybe not forever. We'll see.
Now, one of the other things that failed was that we had some Amanda orange plants close to the air conditioner, and we talked with our friend CB at CB's Greenhouse and Garden, and he thinks that probably what brought on that early blight was the higher humidity of the air coming in. Now, the greenhouse itself has been very low humidity. It's never been above 35% out in the middle of the greenhouse.
Right, but it is sort of focused over there. Now, late in the summer, everything's got white. Basically, I took the 2 Amanda orange plants that were over there and stuck them outside, and they suffered a couple of minor disasters. I come out one morning and I look at one of the plants and I'm like, what has been eating this? There was a big fat tomato hornworm that had mowed off this whole branch, and I'm like, where did you even come from? But he's no longer with us.
That's a good thing.
So that plant is actually recovering now. Both of the Amanda orange plants that we had in here in hydroponics are sitting out in the yard, and I simply water the plants out there once a day and make sure that thing has always got water in it. And believe it or not, they've actually produced a couple of fruit, and they're doing relatively well. We know that anytime you use any kind of a evaporative cooler in a greenhouse, it does increase the moisture level, which can be an issue with fungus a lot of the bigger greenhouses use what they call a water wall, which is basically the entire wall, end wall of the greenhouse is just a huge evaporative cooler. It's some sort of absorptive material that you can blow air through, and you're just using plain old water, and it puts moisture into the air. It drops the temperature like a rock. I mean, it makes a huge difference for us. But it does add to the moisture, and that's one of the reasons we're going to be moving where the Dutch buckets are.
We set the Dutch buckets up with two more or less parallel rows of buckets, each of which had a tomato plant in it, which was good because it put tomatoes into a confined space. It was
Right.
bad because it put tomatoes into a confined space.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to change it up next year. We're going to only have one row of Dutch buckets that will run the more or less the entire length of this greenhouse, and we'll show you where they're going to go and why. What we found was that trying to take care of the double row of plants was extremely difficult, especially if the vegetation started getting out of hand, which it does easily.
Right.
The Dutch bucket table is also too high. What I want to do is move those buckets lower. I'm not sure exactly how low they'll go, but I need to have enough room for the return line to be above ground. Now we have a natural slope of this greenhouse that goes from south to north. North is behind us. And I think that's enough of a slope to drain the nutrient solution back into a sump. I didn't put the sump down in the ground this year. I wanted to try the system out. My plan right now is to go ahead and add a larger sump in the ground so that the temperature is more stable. This worked really, really well. We were able to schedule the pump running so that it kept the water temperature reasonably stable in that sump. We'll go with the larger sump that's in the ground. I think that's going to help deal with a number of problems. We'll also increase the size of the makeup water. I have a 40-gallon rainwater tank here that's good for about 4 days for the 15 plants that we had in here.
During the superheat of the summer.
When it's really hot.
Yeah. When we were 104 degrees every day for 3 weeks.
About 3 weeks, yeah.
Yeah. So during those times, the barrel was only good for 3 or 4 days.
What we found is that these Dutch buckets work just fine. They have enough volume of perlite in them to sustain these large plants very, very well. The plants are looking kind of ratty now because it's end of season. They all have some kind of blight, some kind of fungus. We're busy debating how we're going to deal with end of season with them. You know, I kind of like to help them hang on for a while. I think we'll only try to salvage the Gardener's Delight and the Big Beef.
Right. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be cutting these back. We're currently having a conversation with the folks that we got the seeds from, because we're seeing very unusual growth patterns to the tomatoes, and these were heavily recommended to us as both greenhouse tomatoes and hydroponic tomatoes.
Yeah, we're having conversations with the growers to determine exactly what's going on. That'll be a topic for a future video, hopefully pretty soon. They've been very, very responsive.
Right.
And we'll tell you why it's important to have a good quality seed company behind the seeds that you buy and how to deal with it. Again, in that later video.
Right.
So let's go take a look at what we're going to do.
That's the newest one. Magically appeared last week, and it seems like it grows leaps and bounds every day.
The plant is just taking over the greenhouse. In fact, this is one of the things that kind of complicates our changes in the greenhouse, because this stuff is in the way. I built this bench about 1.5 years ago. It was specific for Dutch buckets. It's 2 feet wide and 8 feet long, which is just fine for a double row. It's maybe a little bit wide for a single row, but I don't think I'm going to use this bench next year for tomatoes. It's about 16 inches tall from the ground to the top of the table. Now that has 2 problems with it. This greenhouse is only 8 foot 3 inches tall at the peak. So at the very top with the top purlin, it's not that tall. Well, 8 foot 3 is pretty tall, but not tall enough for these indeterminate tomatoes. Our plan is to move this bench from this east side of the greenhouse to the west side of the greenhouse. Now, if you look overhead, there's a purlin that runs right here. In the tomatoes, we have a purlin that's closer to the center line. What we're going to do is put another set of purlins along the top near the center line that runs the length of the greenhouse. We'll place the tomatoes out away from the edge so that we can get behind the bench to do trimming or training or anything else like that. So whether or not we put the bench exactly here or towards the center, Irene and I will still discuss. I'm kind of in favor of putting it over here, which I think Irene agrees with. And then we'll do the training up like this. And if we need to use that center line purlin, we can use it. That would allow us to train vines from over here, over there. Our plan is to use a different style of drop and lean. This year, because of the way I set up this bench and the way the Dutch buckets are situated, we had to bring the vines out into the middle of the greenhouse. What we want to do next year is drop the vines one direction or the other and lean it away from the other plants. So we'll keep the tomatoes, the tomato vines, in more or less of a single line. That will minimize the amount of space that we're using in the greenhouse for the tomato production. It means we can do other things. It'll be a lot more efficient. This year was the first year of trial and error for using the Dutch buckets for real. Last year we had to fail because of some water issues while we were gone. This year we had much better control.
These two benches are like 4 feet wide, and they're really sturdy. They've got a lot of structure underneath to keep them so that they're stable. I mean, I can walk around on top of them no problem. Which is a good thing because that's a very heavy water barrel. I don't walk around on top of this one just in case it's just that much more extra. But the current plan is this deep water culture is going to go away. We're going to harvest the stuff out of it, and we're going to set it aside for now. For whatever reason, it just didn't work. When we do the move around, these are going to become, temporarily at least, tables to set some of these wicking totes on. They're covered with plastic so that we could originally pot up into larger pots from seedling trays and things like that. And we will probably be doing a little of that too. We have a whole stack of tomatoes over in this corner here, and we're going to be potting them up and seeing how long we can keep them alive in here. We know at some point we will hit a wall in terms of our ability to keep the greenhouse warm enough to keep the really tender plants happy. So we eventually will lose the cucumbers, the peppers, and the tomatoes. But last year we had tremendous success with cabbage and kohlrabi and a couple of other brassicas. So we're going to be doing that again this winter, and we have a whole bunch more brassicas we're going to be planting. We've got some root vegetables, all kinds of stuff. And we're going to be putting them into wicking totes and also those round tubs like we have the pumpkin in. So that's what we're going to put on here, so that we don't have to be down all the time to handle them. If they're up a little bit, it will actually keep it warmer for the plants because obviously the floor is the coldest place. We're also going to be doing other things like insulating the greenhouse later, but not now. We're still with the cooler on right now. It's 84 in here. So with the cooler off, it would be about 94 at least. So cool is not a problem at this point, but we've got some other plans. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, because we're always doing crazy stuff around here, and obviously we're going to be renovating the greenhouse. We'll eventually be insulating the greenhouse. There'll be lots of plants moving around, and a little plant destruction too, probably. Seeds being planted, although some of those are going to be planted in the house, but lots going on. So until next time,
Bye.
Bye.